talking about Islam coming over into North Africa and the impact that had in the joining together of the Berbers or the Moors with Arabs and going up into Spain. Well, I missed that part in all of my black history classes about us doing anything in Spain. I just didn't get any of that in school. You know, maybe it was just the school I was going to. Right? Did anybody else get that in high school? Black history in Spain? No? No?
Just the U.S. version.
All right. Well, I will go ahead and continue on, and I'll share what I'm referring to as a Spanish connection with you. Now, this particular information right here is coming from a book called Muslim History by Dr. Akram Zahor. But he says in his book, the Muslims of the Iberian Peninsula, and anyone, if you're not real familiar with your geography, I'll do a quick catch-up. But the Iberian Peninsula is right here where you have Spain and Portugal, this whole peninsula right here. So they're talking about when the Muslims went up into the Iberian Peninsula and ruled Spain between 711 and 1492 are commonly known as Moors. Does that year 1492 ring a bell with anybody? Columbus sailed the ocean blue, 1492. Now, it's a particular reason, whether we commonly taught about it or not, that he sailed the exact same year that the Moors was defeated. Because the Moors were the only power on an international level who were standing between the Spanish and all these people over here. And so when the Moors got moved out of the way, Columbus just came right on over here. You know, now they said that Columbus got lost. That's what they taught me when I was in public school. He said he was trying to get over here somewhere looking for the spices. But he ended up way over here and called these people Indians. Now, I'm not going to say that I agree with that, but I will say, let's see what the references say. Now, they called their land Andalus, or Andalusia, which in the early period of their history also included Portugal and southern France, and in the last period only included the Kingdom of Granada. The word Moors is a corrupted word referring to people who came from or passed through Morocco. Later, other words such as Moriscos and Mudejares were used for them beginning in the mid-13th century. Now, since we're in Spain, this one we will have to get familiar with what they refer to in their history as the Reconquest. Because in 711, when the Muslims went across and enveloped the entire peninsula all the way up into southern France, well, the Catholic monarchs, they wanted it back. So this is an 800-year crusade. We hear about the Crusades going to fight for Jerusalem, the Knights Templar and Rene d'Anjou, and you know, all of those individuals and groups and organizations there. But we don't hear a lot of information about the 800 years of war that was fought for the Iberian Peninsula between the Muslims and the Catholics there. Now, that's so important. I'm a social science major myself, and that's just what we do. That's the empirical evidence that we evaluate in order to project how to make a better society. These are things that we look at. Now, when I consider the fact that there are people out here like Tavis Smiley and the numerous pieces of literature that he's put out, I would say, well, yeah, then I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that feels like there's a little room for improvement in terms of socio-cultural standing. You know? So maybe we need to take a little more evidence into account to see just how we can get things back right. You know? I say a lot of people come jumping into diaspora in the middle of it and don't know why the two sides is doing the things that they're doing. Making sense? Now, in the mid-13th century, that's when the Catholics, they was bringing things on back to being under their control. So, this man here, Stanley Lane Poole, one of the books that he's written, The Story of the Moors in Spain. And I tell you what, this guy's a character. He has quite a sense of humor, the way he talks about the Moors. But he does give up some pretty honest and objective evaluations in some points of his information. In the preface of his book, he says, for nearly 8 centuries under her Mohammedan rulers, Spain set to all Europe a shining example of a civilized and enlightened state. Art, literature, and science prospered. The practical work of the field, the scientific methods of irrigation, the arts of fortification and shipbuilding, the highest and most elaborate products of the loom, the graver, and the hammer, the potter's wheel, and the mason's trowel were brought to perfection by the Spanish Moors. Well, they seem like some pretty industrious people. They don't seem like people standing out there on the side of the cow pasture drinking out the bladder bag all day. I guess that's what they had back then. They hadn't made the flask yet. But they said Granada was the last stronghold of the Moors to fall. And that was in the southern part of Spain. So he goes on to say, with Granada fell all Spain's greatness. For a brief while, indeed, the reflection of the Moors' splendor cast a borrowed light upon the history of the land which it had once warmed with its sunny radiance. The great epic of Isabella, Charles V, and Philip II, of Columbus, Cortez, and Pizarro shed a last halo about the dying monuments of a mighty Ferdinand. He was a contemporary with Isabella. And they made a power move because they couldn't beat the Moors. And so Isabella being in Castile, and Ferdinand, well, she was the queen there, and Ferdinand being the king of Aragon, they said, let's get married and join our kingdoms and resources and force together. And that way we can get the Moors out of here. And that's what they did, and in 1492 it happened. They were just organized and they did what they did. Now, Columbus, I'll take for granted we all familiar with Christopher Columbus in some degree. He sailed, you know, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Lima, or something like that. That's it. Thank you. But there's so many references out here about this information. This guy, Mr. Philip Hitt, in the book that he wrote called Islam in the West, he talks about some particulars that were going on during that last war when the Catholic monarchs finally conquered Granada and the Moors lost their power. He said in the spring of 1491, Ferdinand, with 10,000 horse, entered for the second time the plain of Granada. He laid siege to the city and pressed a blockade to starve it to surrender. This it did on January 2nd, 1492. That's almost a year of starvation. Gotta eat.